Yeah, Jerry mentioned, the goal of a conservation program isn't just to save water during a drought, but to produce permanent change. And we saw the 2018 number, this county saved 20%, which is permanent change. And the Landscape Committee played a part in that. So if you need another reason to be part of the Landscape Committee, you can impact your community by doing so. All right, next up on the agenda is our first presentation in the morning. The first presentation will be the ReScape California Rated Landscape Program by Ms. Sarah Sutton, a landscape architect and board president of ReScape California. Sarah Sutton is a licensed landscape architect with over 35 years experience in sustainable landscape design and construction, from public parks, commercial development and streetscapes, to open space and riparian corridor restoration. In addition, she is an active ReScape rater and has been closely involved in the development and implementation of the rating system and guidelines for over 10 years. Sarah is also the author of The New American Front Yard, Kiss Your Grass Goodbye, an award-winning and well-illustrated guide to transforming lawn-centric front yards and communities to beautiful, eco-friendly, low-maintenance gardens that conserve water, protect our watersheds, and enhance habitat values. Please welcome Ms. Sarah Sutton.
Good morning. What a great crowd. Before I get started, I always like to know who's in the audience. So raise your hand as many times as it's appropriate to who you are and what you represent. So how many people here represent public agencies? Okay, great. How many people design landscapes? All right. How many people build them? And then how many of you maintain them? Good. All right. Good mix. It's really an honor to be invited to be here. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. That's always the best audience. So we were asked, ReScape was asked to talk about our rating program. I'm hoping that you'll find this interesting and want to get involved. The key topics, I won't read them all out, but we'll talk about the organization and the landscape, and then also some synergies and relationships that I think are important to why this is such a successful program. First, a brief history. Okay, another hand moment here. How many people have heard of the Bay-Friendly Landscaping? Yeah, okay. Well, that was first developed by stopwaste.org. Well, now they just call themselves Stop Waste, so things change. And that's the Alameda County Waste Management Authority and Recycling Board, which would have been a horrible acronym. So they really branded themselves well, Stop Waste, because that's what they were focused on. And they developed the landscape rating program and the landscape trainings because first with the buildings and then they went into the landscape. So much waste from landscape development and maintenance was going into landfill. And so they developed a rating program to make sure that projects were designed and constructed and maintained to follow those guidelines and mandates that made it a little more accountable. The program wanted to expand beyond Alameda County, so a coalition was formed, very similar to the one you have down here, called the Bay Friendly Landscape and Gardening Coalition in 2009. And eventually, I was on the board for a while, and then we decided that, we were getting requests from other parts of the state. So once again, we rebranded ourselves as ReScape California, and that was official in 2015. And as part of that statewide expansion, the Eco Landscape California folks, also like-minded, similar programs, up in the Sacramento area really said, we need to band together. It's just too much work for all these little people, little organizations. So that's who ReScape is. We still represent the Bay-friendly programs. And so what is a rated landscape? Are you familiar with LEED for buildings? Yeah, we have all seen that. It's a great program, been around for a long time, U.S. Green Building Council. What they do for landscapes, it's a statewide or national program, and the landscape component is very limited. And those of you in the industry know there's so much that goes into creating and maintaining a healthy landscape, healthy soil. So we developed a scorecard program way back in 2004 or 5. The first rated landscape was, I think, 2006. It was a fire station down in Pleasanton. And it focused on commercial and civic landscapes and multifamily housing landscapes because that's where the new construction was, and bigger landscapes, bigger impact. But any irrigated landscape with 2,500 square feet or more could apply for a rating. And how it works is we have a rater, a separate person who goes through the scorecard, works with the design team, and the scorecard outlines, you can see a piece of it here, numerous practices, some are required, I'll go through those, focusing on stormwater, site planning issues, plant materials, there's a whole category on that, irrigation, all the things we need to think about. There's a total of 7 or 8 categories. And a new thing I wanted to mention, that's why the asterisk is there. Up until recently, the rater had to be someone outside of the design team, outside of that came in separately. And we decided that there was an advantage in some projects to have it be an in-house person. So you could actually rate your own landscape. We just have a slightly different path for checking what you're doing to make sure that you aren't checking boxes that shouldn't have been checked. Just for accountability. A third party is easier to claim of the accountability. And the rater works with the owner and the design team ideally early on. It's hard to shoehorn practices in later in the game. It's nice to get them on board. There's been a lot of education through this process of professionals and contractors and so on, to where I think actually it's becoming more mainstream, which is great. It's really accomplished a lot. And then there are verification documents at the end. We actually ask for the tags, for the compost, for the mulch. We want to make sure it really got put in there, because it's really hard to tell once you go out there at the end and you lift up the plant. Well, I don't know, is it in there? And there are 14 required credits, and I'll mention a few of them later, plus a minimum of 60 points, and there's available 225, so depending on the type of landscape you have, streets are different from parks, so different opportunities. And then ReScape reviews the final application and issues the rating. So very comprehensive project, and I think it's become very successful in the projects that have been rated. So far we have on the board 78 rated landscapes, mostly in Alameda County, because that's where it started. But we're starting to get interest even beyond the Bay Area now, and reaching out to contact people. And we have 25 pending projects. This is a park in Hayward, Greenwood Park. There are lots of tools and resources available to the rater. First of all, you have to be trained. We have a training program, and there's a precursor program called what is called the Bay Friendly Qualified Professional, which now we're calling it the ReScape Qualified Professional. We train designers, contractors, we train city staff on maintenance practices. City of Oakland, City of San Francisco in particular have an annual training. It helps with keeping their staff up to date, and they learn all the best practices to maintain a sustainable landscape. We've got lots of tools on the website, which is rescapeca.org, that you can use in your design work and maintenance work. We have a Raters Council. What happens if you're a rater and you get some pushback, which does happen, and sometimes you get someone on the design team who says, I've been doing this for 40 plus years and I know how to design your irrigation system, and you try to tactfully say, well, you know, the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance doesn't require that you do this. At some point, it's nice to have someone else, a higher authority, right, give the response, since that's what the Raters Council does, and they validate certain questions. We do desk audits now. We make sure that the rater has a little extra supervision. It's just a couple hours, it's not a big deal, but there's a lot of built-in redundancy in making sure that when it's done, it really is what it says it is. It hasn't been greenwashed. And there's lots of support for the raters, from training and programs and continuing education, and we're building a really strong community. And I will say, if any of you think this is something you'd like to do, be sure to get a hold of us. We have a table outside. Let us know, because it's something that you can do. It's a nominal fee, but it helps pay the bills and gets you involved in working with other people to make sure that the work is done right. And I'm sure a lot of you already are doing these things. So there is an emphasis on maintenance. In fact, to really encourage it, 30 of those 60 points could come from the maintenance aspect of the scorecard. So there's nothing worse than doing a great job and then they don't want to hire you to do the maintenance. And you come back a few years later and go, I didn't want those to be gumdrops. I didn't want this to happen. And you see your landscape going downhill, both visually as well as environmentally. So one of the tools we have is template. It's a specification. It's a manual that you can cut and paste. You can remove. There's a lot of highlights to say, fill this in here, like how many square feet you have. So it encourages For those of you who write technical specs for civic projects, there's technical specifications for several areas that you can just use and modify to put in your bid specs. And one thing we've discussed is we've had landscapes where the bay-friendly pelican sign is looking sad and rusted and the landscape's falling apart. One is in particular is in a landscape median as you come off the freeway into a certain city. And we decided maybe we need to just, kind of like the DMV, only it's maybe for 3 years. You're rated for 3 years and then you gotta get a little sticker to say, yes, you're still doing it right. We don't want to have negative advertising for our program. And we also will be starting to develop just a focused maintenance program, maybe a 1 day. So you've got people can go to this class and you can then put them on your website if you're doing it down here and make sure that they're taking care of the landscape. These are all the credits. I won't read them all, but we talk about grass cycling, producing compost on site from your plant trimmings. The larger jurisdictions don't allow you to take green waste to the landfill anymore, but we do see trucks driving down the highway full of piled high with green clippings all the time. So we want to make sure that these are being called out and written into the technical spec. Fertilizers, using organics. That was great to hear about the golf course using organic materials. And organic pest management and so on. And no shearing. So a number of different techniques. Another emphasis on maintenance is the tools that we've developed over the years. There was a need to explain early on what grass cycling is, the fact that it does work. So we have case studies, we have a guide that's several pages, all free on the website, you can download it. And many of these are in Spanish because many of the people who do the work in the maintenance field do use Spanish as their primary language. So it's easier to understand if it's in their native tongue. Here's a copy of the maintenance specs, and it's about 30 pages long. It has everything, so you can go through and say no lawn, take that section out. And we encourage the clients to, if they don't have control over the maintenance, whether it's a large civic landscape, maybe this building, or just a small residential, to use this as the template, doctor it for what works for you, and then give it to the contractor you're getting the bid from. So then you know, you're telling them this is what I want you to give me the price on. And of course, you always get accurate bids when people know what they're offering and they're not making assumptions. So there are multiple environmental benefits from getting a rated landscape. Reducing the construction waste is mandatory. We're conserving energy and water, reducing erosion and sedimentation, reducing fire risk and flooding. You talk about the deluge and the drought, right? It's either one or the other these days. Lots of extremes, atmospheric rivers and then firestorms coming through. The hazardous chemicals are greatly reduced, and even the greenhouse gases are reduced through the different practices, one of which is just sourced locally. No embedded energy from all the traffic delivering materials to you from different parts of the country or the world. Soil health, we require compost and mulch. And that is required now from the water fishing ordinance, but if you have a project that isn't requiring that you fill out those forms, this will make sure that it gets done. And everything flows into the creeks and the bays, as we know, and it encourages pollinators and better connections with nature. So here's a couple more projects. I'm sure, again, since I'm preaching to the choir, that you've probably heard that Roundup as a carcinogen was recently backed up by the state appeals court, which I thought, yay, good. Because people understand the middle picture. They know that they're not supposed to put toxic chemicals in the drain, right? They're beginning to understand that. I had one person say a few years ago, well, doesn't it go to the sanitary plant and don't they just somehow magically remove that item from the materials? So it's really hard to stay pleasant when people say that, but especially if you're at a cocktail party, right, and have a glass of wine. So it's 33% of non-agricultural pesticides are being used in landscapes and along roadways. We see it everywhere. So we're trying to encourage people to not use it, or as integrated pest management is, only as a last resort, and use the least toxic method. Invasive plants. Now I know we aren't planting Pampas grass in our gardens, but it's a great picture. Just shows how bad it can get at some point. But you do see in some of these nurseries, Lowe's or Home Depot, how many times have you gone by around about this time? Broom looks really great in that 1 gallon can, and it's still being offered. So we want to try to, we do not allow people to use any of those plants in there. We use the Cal IPSC list, the Don't Plant a Pest. We have the rater checks to make sure they're not on the plant list. But it's a very costly problem that we're having. And the metrics that we're gathering, the scorecard has many, it's an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of tabs that integrate, and it starts to, using different metrics, tell you what your savings is in water compared to a conventional landscape. Labor savings will vary, but it's definitely a reduced labor savings. Weed suppression without the chemicals, reducing the runoff, and we are getting benefits in reducing greenhouse gases. You can, this is, I think, one of the biggest selling points. The water efficient landscape ordinance is great, but in talking to various jurisdictions, some agencies have the staff and they do review the plans and they do see if there's an error and they turn it back. But in many cases, there just isn't the staff to do it, or they just rely on the signature on the title page from the designer saying, I've done this to comply. Everything in the scorecard meets the requirements of the water efficient landscape ordinance. And we say that it's not a substitute, but it reinforces, just because we want to make sure that people are not using this and ignoring the water efficient ordinance and some of the good information there. And it's also with the C3 is the stormwater management. That's where you have the rain gardens and parking lots, and we're capturing, it's a requirement for certain size projects, mostly for the agencies, to keep that oil. Boy, I was in a parking lot this morning, and the oil slick was 8 feet square in the wet spot in the parking lot. It doesn't take, all the rain will wash it away, and it all comes back from the vehicles within a week or two. Constantly a problem. It never just washes away and gone for the season. So Bay Area Regional Water Quality Control Board recognizes a rated landscape as a DMP. And then here's some other regulatory requirements that a rating supports, such as the greenhouse gas initiatives that all cities or agencies are required to have with their climate action plans. Green Point rated homes, it's an innovation credit. I've already mentioned the water efficient ordinance, and that's required by Cal Green. So there's a lot of synergies, but getting it rated makes sure that many of those items are being checked and they're done. And then the demolition and construction debris diversion is a requirement. Cities have their forms, but on a landscape basis, sometimes things get lumped together, and we encourage and even require that they separate the green waste from the other types of waste so that it's being more efficiently recycled. So another benefit is often cities and agencies have siloed departments, and you've got the stormwater people, and you've got the landscape maintenance people, and you've got a lot to do, and you have to stay siloed for certain reasons. But this integrates, it's a holistic approach, and so it integrates all the goals. And every time we update the scorecard, we are in touch with agencies and their departments and do our best to make sure that everything is working together to create a complete and holistic landscape. Many cities, starting with Alameda County, have actually adopted for projects that reach a certain threshold. Usually it's around $200,000 to $250,000. These are commercial civic landscapes. It doesn't take parks or millions of dollars, so it's a low threshold. The third quality, if some cities can continue to require the third party if they feel that's important, or they can adopt the in-house, knowing that we're checking either way within the ReScape review process. And at times, as I mentioned before, it can help lessen the burden on staff. You just know there's that higher level of scrutiny on the landscape that you get when you get a rated landscape. So the water efficient ordinance, the WELO compliance, we even have one that says meet your local Cal WELO, and the rater has to see the signed document that says they've met that, whatever review agency they send it to. So again, it's making sure it just doesn't get overlooked. I mentioned the scorecard has different tabs, and one of them is a water calculator. So they have to enter in the data, enter in the valves, the water use. It's exactly the same way it is in the water efficient ordinance, but the benefit here is it goes back to the initial intake form of the size of your project, amount of landscape, hardscape, and it'll give you an error message if your numbers don't add up. So it's a great way to cross-check on the form and make sure that you've done it right and that you haven't made an error. And sometimes with the new ordinance, it can be really tight. 45% of your ET is a low number, and you have to be very careful about where you choose plants that aren't exclusively low water if you choose to do so. So all of these credits, the bold, are required, and those all relate to the water efficient ordinance. So again, if you're getting rated, you meet the requirements, and you know if you're the agency, all right, if they're rated, they have to do all of this. This reinforces that the water efficient ordinance is being met. And it goes beyond. We always raise the bar beyond what's required. There is recognition for you, for the designer, for the contractor, for the agency. This is just a sampling on the lower left of once they're submitted, we get pictures, we have you upload, we take the data from the scorecard and it goes up on the website. And so and we have a listing of some of the key benefits. So it's great promotion for you, for the agency. There's signs that you can obtain. And also we like the little public education, I call them bumper stickers. Simple little messages, and we have the graphics so you can just send it out for a metal sign. It's real easy, and it's just scattered throughout the landscape saying, this is why we have mulch. This is why this plant is here. And the public learns from that and helps spread the message. Now the scorecard, I want to emphasize, if you've ever worked on a LEED project, which can be overwhelming, this one is designed to be what we call prescriptive. Do this, do this, do this, and quantify. It's not achieve such and such goal and then you tell us how you did that, which is very iterative and not as clear cut. So we wanted to keep it simple and defensible. And I'm a chart person, I'm a web Excel person. I like to look and see something organized on a chart. So I like the checklist. It helps me wrap my head around what's really important. This is a comparison to the water efficient ordinance, and then there's another rating system called Sustainable Sites. It's a national system developed with landscape architects and the LEED folks. And again, it's not tailored to California, and it's not as specific. So what this is showing you is that a rated landscape not only meets all of the WELO requirements, but some of the WELO recommendations are required by this program. So it's a much stronger landscape. And this is just showing the comparison I just mentioned, the LEED versus sustainable sites. We have a field visit. You go out on the site and you say, well, did they do what they said they were going to do? And there are a number of activities the rater does on the site visit at the end. And it's just more reliable and it's regionally focused. So I'm moving on to the next person's talk. I should do that. So thank you. I want to say one thing before we finish. Brian did mention the book, and normally on the table we have a couple out there, and I didn't bring any. But we like to do a drawing. So if you're interested in getting a copy, this is the New American Front Yard, in case you grass me by. And many of the featured landscapes are from San Jose and from your water district area. So it was designed to answer the question for the homeowner, where do I start? I think it's a good compliment. So if you're interested, give their business card to Geneva out at the table. So thank you very much. I'm available for questions, either now or later.
Now?
Now? Are we good with time?
Yes, we have time.
Okay, great.
So what are the incentives for your clients to want this ReScape certification?
That's a really good question. Initially, when the program started, Stop Waste offered some in-kind support, and they paid for the rater and for agency for larger city projects. But now it's all self-supported. So first of all, you can, as I mentioned, the water efficient ordinance and other ordinances, if you have a project that has to go through that process, the incentive to the client, if it's a public sector client, is this will ensure that you meet those requirements, as well as being a very holistic landscape. Another benefit is it ensures that the landscape is installed, designed and installed, it all works together, right? So that you will have a healthy landscape. You will have a landscape that will thrive. by following these practices and making sure that someone's verifying that they were completed.
Hi, I'm back here. So I'm a landscape designer who works specifically on residential. I have gone through the ReScape certification, and my big push is why, or is this on the radar for ReScape to get this landscape reading program for residential? There are, in this valley, there are many areas at over 2,500 square feet on a typical residence, is not unheard of. And especially in this valley when there's a lot of people who like to one-up their neighbors.
Yes. That's not a benefit, by the way.
And I hate to say it, but
people love the sign.
They do. And as a designer, I want to promote these things, but sometimes it's not enough just to do the right thing. The clients need to kind of have that incentive. So is there a push or any opportunity to get this over to the residential sector?
We haven't been actively promoting it, but right now, so that's number one, we can start to spread the word out through what we would call promotional partners. Work with your agency here and just say, did you know you could do this? And here's where it is, here's how you find it. Were you interested in smaller landscapes than 2,500?
No, not necessarily, but it's not a stretch. I mean, if it were 2,000, I think you get probably a lot more. It's probably not so much the square footage.
Right.
It's being able to apply it just to the residential sector.
Yes, that is something we're talking about, and we actually have a board meeting this afternoon, so I'll bring it up. Great. Thank you.
No other questions? For those of you who don't know, that's Lori Morris that Director Santos referenced earlier, the chair who's kicked off this program for us 4 years ago.
Okay.
Brian?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, one more question.
Hello, I'm also a designer, and like Lori, I do residential only. Well, in my case, residential only. But I just wanted to support her in what she just told you. I would love to see a program that doesn't have a square foot requirement to apply. I realize that might be a high bar because there's your time and effort involved. But I live in Mountain View, and sometimes I think our enforcement of landscaping requirements could be a little tighter there. Yeah. I'm amazed at that it's not. But I think they were telling me that it's resources on their end. So a program like this might be helpful for me to sort of sell it and promote it to my clients, especially since the lawn rebate program, when it was in its heyday, maybe 2014-15, and you had higher rebates per square footage, removing lawns in residential areas. There were a lot of clients interested in that. Now that it's mainly $1 a square foot in most places, I think, at least where I work, there's far less interest. So that type of incentive. But this might be another incentive that we could push with the right client.
And I'll just put a shout out to all of you who are with agencies. One of the best ways is to say, yes, we want our landscapes to be rated. And then that provides an opportunity for raters then to offer that service, and it becomes, by making that policy, that's where the incentive starts to grow. Yes.
I'm Sherry Bryan. I work for Ecology Action, and in 2012 we actually signed an MOU with ReScape, who was then Bay Friendly on a Prop 84 grant. And what we did just that in the Monterey Bay area, we kind of customized the program for residential, and it was really successful. The incentive that we offered was we partnered with local ecological landscape vendors to offer discounts on materials because people really need the help from experts while they're redesigning and doing their transition projects. And we certified about 85 residential sites in the first year of the program. And so the people love the signs or they hate the signs, right? But the sign was an incentive in and of itself for those people who, like you said, want to kind of one-up their neighbor. And we had to really simplify the checklist and translate to Spanish to make it equitable for residential. But it is possible to do it, and we can talk about models on how to make that scalable throughout California.
Sure, thank you. All right, thank you all.
One more question.
One more? Okay.
I just wanted to know if artificial turf is not allowed on the ReScape. I'm getting very disappointed to see it popping up more and more around me.
It's not addressed on the scorecard, but we did a study with Glendale. We were hired, ReScape was, California. They were trying to deal with many people in the community wanting to be able to use their rebate program to put in artificial turf. And we helped them first to classify artificial turf as paving. And they had a 50% living landscape requirement, so that effectively pushed it out. So we aren't saying no artificial turf, but if the need arises, I think that's something that should go into the scorecard, so thanks for bringing it up. Okay, thank you very much.
One more.
Oh, okay.
Publish off, gets all
I'm
the
not trying
questions.
to run away, I just want to
If
give
we
you
were
time.
thinking of, I work for a city, and if we were thinking
Yes.
of adding a requirement saying all new landscapes have to be rated, how many raters are there available in the South Bay currently, and what's sort of the backlog, and how long would it take to get your landscape rated?
We have more raters way more raters available than we have landscapes to rate right now, so actually it's the opposite problem. And I know there are some in the San Jose area, I would just have to look on the website, they're all listed. And if there was a need for local raters, we would certainly be willing to schedule a course to train up, say 30 or so minimum. Thank you, I'll get your card. Okay, great.
Thank you, great
Thank you.
questions.